Ansible, a powerful configuration management tool that allows developers to automate software provisioning, configuration management, and application deployment. And by the end of this video, I'd like to explore how it can make your life as a developer so much easier. Hey there, fellow keyboard tappers. My name's Jameson, your guide today. Let's go ahead and dive in. Okay guys, so for today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys something really cool. I'm going to show you how to create a Python-based Docker image, and then we're going to go ahead and install Ansible, run our Ansible commands on it, as well as any other Python commands that we might want to run. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my week 8 folder. And the first thing I'm going to do, you'll see here, I already have some created files. I'm just going to go ahead and go through them and then get to the nitty gritty. So if we open up this Docker file, we'll see here we have a few different parts. If you're already familiar with Docker, I'm going to go ahead and skip through some of this, but please refer to our earlier video on Docker for anything that you don't understand. Starting off, we have our base image, which is going to be a Python slim image. And you'll see here I'm using the slim tag rather than the latest tag. This is just so we'll have a very condensed bare image for Python rather than a Python image loaded with lots of the stuff that the latest version actually comes with. And that's just some standard. That's just something standard to note when working with Docker images. The whole idea is to keep them very lightweight. So go with the more slim images when you can. That way you kind of keep with that lightweightness. For our next session, we have our update and configuration. This is going to be all the stuff that we need to install before Ansible, as well as our Python packages. This first line right here will just make sure that everything is updated and upgraded. Everything over here are just packages that we're going to need to install to be used by Ansible. We have the sudo package, the SSH package. This one will allow us to use ping and some iputil tools. We have netcat, etc., etc. Moving on, we have our actual Python dependencies for Ansible. We have our very first statement, which will upgrade our pip version. Next, we actually install Ansible, Ansible lint, as well as Boto and Boto 3, which are going to be useful if you're ever trying to run Ansible and maybe trying to connect to something like AWS. The Boto package is very, very important. And next, we have our next line, which is going to be our working directory. We're going to go ahead and switch to this /playbooks directory, and I'll explain what this directory is probably in a little bit. And last but not least, we have this entry point. And you'll see this entry point command is just running a very simple sleep infinity command. This is just so we'll have a consistent running container that we're going to be able to exec into, turn on and off as possible. The container just needs a running command so it knows when to start and stop. And if you throw it a sleep infinity, the container will just stay on, essentially, until you turn it off. Okay, next up, if we go ahead and go over to our docker compose.yml file, we'll see here, I created a very simple file just so I wouldn't have to run our very long docker run command using version 3.8. I'm gonna go ahead and name this our Ansible server. You'll see here, sticking to that name, our first step is going to be to build our docker file. And then our final line is just to mount a volume called playbooks to that playbook directory that was mentioned over here in the Docker file. And all this directory is going to do is house some playbooks on our local PC. So we'll be able to create playbooks locally and then just go ahead and run them on the container by just moving them over to that mounted directory. So let's go ahead and get started by first, let's go ahead and compose up. And once I compose up, that should actually start our process and start the build. Okay, and it looks like that container has been started. Same with the network. If I go ahead and move over to my Docker extension, there we go. You'll see here I do have this new week 8 Ansible container. And if you're using the Docker Virtual Studio extension, you can just go ahead and attach shell. If you're just manually running your Docker commands, you should just be able to exec onto the container. If so, let's go ahead and attach that shell. And now I should hopefully be on that container. Yep. If I do a present working directory, I am currently in that playbooks directory, ls, and it should have this getDate.yml file that I mentioned earlier, or that I have up here, and I'll go through this in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and just make sure that our Ansible is actually working on here. So one thing you can do right off the bat is run the Ansible command, and you should get an output like this, which will display, just all of the arguments that are available for Ansible, what this command actually does, and just lets you know that Ansible is installed and ready to go. Next thing we could probably do is run the Ansible playbook command, which will do something similar. This is just making sure that we have our Ansible playbook CLI command that we can use. So now that we are sure that these work, let's go ahead and try running an actual Ansible command. And one thing you actually do is run something called an Ansible ad hoc command, which is basically just kind of running everything that would be within a standard Ansible file within the CLI. And I'll go ahead and show you an example of that. So if I wanted to, let's say, run the present working directory, find the present working directory, and implicitly, Ansible already knows that it can run all of its commands on the local host, so I'll just go ahead and give it the local host for the host. And I'll go ahead and give it the command module and argument pwd. And don't be too concerned about what I'm typing right now. We'll explain in just a second. So going through this command, all this is saying is that I'm running the Ansible CLI. I am targeting the local host for my Ansible inventory. For this section, you could actually use an actual Ansible inventory. Like I said earlier, implicitly Ansible will let you use the local host, but if you already have hosts defined within your host file on Ansible, you could also just pass it those host names or pass it the host file, like I said earlier. Next, you pass it this -m flag, which will go ahead and prompt you for a module, or whatever you're trying to actually run with Ansible. This module that I'm running right here is going to be the command module, which is going to allow me to run batch commands or shell commands on the server that I'm trying to. And this -a flag is just going to be passing an argument to that module. And for this argument, I'm just passing the pwd command. If you're familiar with shell commands, this is just going to print out the present working directory, or the current directory that is running this program. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And bam, it looks like Ansible was able to run it. Great, that confirms that Ansible is working, but let's go ahead and run something else and just double check. Let me run a ping command. And I know implicitly that you just need to pass it the ping module. You don't really need to pass in any arguments. So if I do that, great. Looks like I'm also able to ping the localhost server, which I obviously would hopefully be able to do. But this is just making sure that I'm actually successfully able to run my Ansible commands, at least on the local host. So that tells me that Ansible is installed correctly, and I'm ready to go if I were to want to test any Ansible, any just Ansible ad hoc commands. Now, if I wanted to test for Ansible playbooks, like I said earlier, I did already create this getDate.yml file. So what you would do for this is just run the Ansible playbook command and then just pass it the file name. And you'll see here, let's go ahead and go through this before I actually create this so you guys get an idea of what this is actually doing. So up here, I'm just declaring that I'm just going to call this Ansible playbook shell examples, and for the hosts, I'm just going to pass it the localhost like I did earlier for my ad hoc commands. Next up, it's going to ask me for tasks, and the tasks are just going to be what Ansible should be doing. So pretty much you could load it up with you're essentially just going to be loading it up with a bunch of these ad hoc commands. But instead of like typing it out like localhost -m ping and localhost -m command, you're just type it out under the task. So for this task, I'm running a shell command, which is going to be using the shell module, and I am going to be prompting it for, or I'm going to be asking the server for the date, and then outputting that date into the playbooks date directory under the date.txt file. And then down here, it's just going to register the output as date.cmd if I ever wanted to reuse this as a variable and print it out. Okay, let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. That's good. Didn't really get an output message, but that's fine. What I really want to make sure is that this date.txt file was created. So if I go ahead and check that, you'll see here, date was printed successfully. If I run it again, so that was Ansible playbook gets date.yml. Same thing, file is now updated because Ansible was able to run it again. And that is pretty much how you would run commands on the Ansible container. I think that should be good for today. Let's go ahead and start cleaning up our resources. As usual, all you'll have to actually need to do is just, if you'd like to keep this container persistent, you can always just mount a mounted folder and just make sure all of your important files are mounted directly. Or you could just go ahead and stop the container. I'm going to go ahead and remove it since I don't really need it anymore. But, you know, you do as you need. Anyway, that's pretty much it for today's tutorial, guys. Thank you for joining. Yeah, just let me know if you guys can think of anything else cool that you can do with Ansible. Okay everyone, thanks for watching, and if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe for more content. Or click on one of these videos on the screen if you want to learn something else. Take care, and I'll see you soon.